Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show on Reason and Theology. Happy New Year to everybody. Looking forward to a great year, and I certainly pray that y'all will have a blessed year. In 2024, wow, there's a few things going on that I wanted to engage with this stream. There's a pope who, I'm sorry, a pope. There's a priest who has recently been excommunicated for calling the pope a usurper. I want to take a look at that, address briefly the issue of sedevacantism, and then I also want to comment, on a few other things like the lightning strike of a St. Peter's statue, Regis Martin's article. I just briefly want to comment on that. Perhaps I'll treat it in a more in-depth video later on, and a few other things, some odds and ends. Okay, so that's kind of what we're up against here. But I want to remind you, hit that subscribe button. Just reached 70K. Thank you to everybody who made that happen. Really appreciate y'all's support of the channel. And I would just ask for those who have not subscribed yet, please go ahead and do so. The more people who subscribe, as well as like and comment on the content, the more YouTube will send the content out to new people and reach them with the content you appreciate here at Reason and Theology. So please help me do that by hitting the subscribe button. Okay, well, let me go ahead and share my screen and let's take a look at this situation with a priest who was just excommunicated, again, for saying that Pope Francis is a usurper, which would, of course, mean that he is not actually the Pope. You can see here, MSN just recently shared an article from ANSA on the situation. An Italian priest was excommunicated Tuesday for calling Pope Francis a usurper in his New Year's Eve homily, marking the first anniversary of the death of Francis's predecessor, Benedict XVI. His name is Don Ramon Guidetti, a parish priest at the Livorno on the Tuscan coast, was excommunicated by his local bishop for telling his flock that the Argentine pontiff, who took over after German Pope Benedict sensationally quit in February 2013, is not the Pope. He's a usurper. Father Guidetti said later Tuesday that it was a mark of pride to be out of this church, which is a tyranny. One wonders why he didn't leave sooner, if that is the case. But yeah, it is unfortunate. We do have people who still are physically present in the Catholic Church, but have long ago left it internally through what's called the sin of schism, which we're briefly going to talk about. Whenever you say Pope Francis isn't Pope, you're no longer submitting to his pontificate. And according to canon law, there's an automatic excommunication for people who maintain such a wayward view. So again, if you were to reject Pope Francis's authority because you don't believe he is the Pope, that again, there is an automatic penalty of excommunication. Now, of course, a bishop can always come back later on and declare that excommunication that has already taken place automatically and internally. And of course, if this is a clergyman, the bishop should declare that. Because it would be very awkward to have somebody who is already internally excommunicated to continue to function as a priest within the Church of Jesus Christ. So bishops have a duty to publicly declare and remove from ministry any of their priests who maintain such a schismatic position. Let's briefly take a look at the Code of Canon Law just to reiterate this point and substantiate it. Here you can see very clearly in Canon 751, it notes that heresy I'm sorry, schism is the refusal of submission to the supreme pontiff, that's the Pope, or of communion with the members of the church subject to him. Now, so if it's not merely failing to recognize who is the Pope, but it's also right here the refusal to submit to the Pope. So, again, if one does not believe that the Pope actually is the Pope, they certainly can't submit to him as the supreme pontiff, right? That's diametrically opposed. You will never submit to someone who you don't actually believe has that authority over you. So if Pope Francis is Pope, and he certainly is, then to refuse to recognize him as Pope or to say he's a usurper is to commit the sin of schism. And it is a grave sin. So we are talking about grave matter here. And again, according to the code of canon law, an apostate from the faith, a heretic, or a schismatic incurs an automatic excommunication. Automatic excommunication. Again, this is not the same as a declared excommunication, which a bishop may declare, a bishop or even the Pope. This is something that happens automatically without the declaration of a bishop or a pope. So clearly this priest was already excommunicated, and the bishop did the right thing to call it out and say, yeah, sorry, but you're excommunicated. You can't hold to that position and still stick around in our church and hold office and stuff like that while sowing division. Unfortunately, for the life of me, I still do not understand why Pope Francis hasn't taken this same direction with some of the others in the church who are openly flaunting their sedevacantism. Here I speak specifically about Archbishop Vigano, who for a while now has been openly a sedevacantist. And so he has already been automatically excommunicated from the church. He has openly flaunted his sedevacantism. And yet, I mean, Pope Francis still allows him to carry the title Archbishop. Now, he doesn't have a diocese, but still, I mean, he's called Archbishop Vigano. I don't know for the life of me why he hasn't been laicized. One wonders why the Holy Father can tolerate such things, but hopefully that is coming to an end, especially if more bishops stand up against this stuff. Hopefully that'll encourage the Bishop of Rome to also stand against archbishops who are, again, openly flaunting sedevacantism in the Catholic Church today. I think that will also certainly send a message to some others who are content creators who are sedevacantists. Now, I do want to remind you, let me just briefly share this on my screen. The Bishop Strickland, not long ago, promoted the very same words that caused this priest to become excommunicated. Now, Bishop Strickland does not himself assert that Pope Francis is a usurper, but as I've mentioned before, he did promote that position by reading a letter of a person who asserts that. And he nowhere, unfortunately, corrected it during the reading of the letter, but seemed to let it slide. And a lot of people just kind of overlooked that like it's no big deal. But I just want to remind you, it is a really big deal because, again, we've just seen a priest who has been excommunicated for this the use of this very word. Here's, again, a letter that Strickland read that he was written to him, that he read out loud. And it says things like, would you now allow this one, that is Pope Francis, who has pushed aside the true Pope, that's Benedict, and has attempted to sit on a chair that is not his. In other words, the author of the letter very clearly doesn't believe Pope Francis is the Pope. And then later on in the letter, he says, and yet this usurper of Peter's chair, referring again to Pope Francis, has counted life as naught, for he has endangered souls by proclaiming that they are justified before God as they are, with no need of repentance, which is absolutely false. Pope Francis has explicitly denied that position and asserted the contrary. But aside from that, again, here you have Bishop Strickland, who was, again, reading a letter of a person openly saying these things and nowhere offered a rebuke of those words or correction or just disagreement with it. Again, it seems he disagrees with it, but we wouldn't know that from the instance where he read the letter. And again, it was often just kind of, dismissed by a lot of people. It's not that big of a deal. But again, here is a person who has now been excommunicated for making that very claim. So, yeah, it is a big deal to share this kind of stuff. Aside from the fact it's not true, it's again schismatic. So just a friendly reminder about that. Now, shifting gears a little bit here, let's briefly talk about the lightning striking a statue of St. Peter in Argentina. I've had so many people ask me about this, and I'm sorry, but I just don't understand why people find this kind of stuff troubling, persuasive, concerning. Don't get it, because I noticed that when it comes to trying to interpret weather phenomenon, you can interpret it however you wish. It's a wax nose. If lightning strikes a mosque, Christians will say, see, God is against Islam. If lightning strikes a statue of Buddha, see, God believes Buddhism is a corrupt religion. If lightning strikes a Jesus statue, Muslims might say, see, Christianity is false. If lightning strikes a Pope statue, Protestants might say, see, Catholicism is false, Protestantism is true. There's a million ways to interpret these things. And so I've never really found it very helpful for people to try to read into these things. It kind of reminds me of certain pagan practices, like trying to read the direction that birds fly in and signals that they make to determine the future or something along those lines. It just doesn't seem very reliable, again, because it's kind of a wax nose. People can interpret it however they want. What would be more helpful, however, is to follow the divine revelation that God has given us in the deposit of faith, and to follow the Catholic magisterium, the teaching authority of Jesus Christ on earth. What I find most troubling is Catholics, I say that loosely, Catholics, who attempt to appeal to these things like weather phenomenon, to somehow assert a theological position, while meanwhile ignoring the actual teaching authority that Jesus Christ has given to us here on earth, namely the magisterium. We go from that which is certain and that which is safe, and from relying on it, to now departing from that rule of faith to, I'm now going to somehow interpret this weather phenomenon and use that as a theological argument to argue over and against the actual rule of faith that Jesus Christ has given us. Again, I find it inconsistent for Catholics to engage in this kind of stuff. So if you haven't heard, there was allegedly an instance where lightning struck a statue of St. Peter in Argentina. And it seems, again, I haven't been able to verify this. I'm just going based on what people have presented as true or as what happened. Um, assuming it's true, assuming it happened, they will say, well, if you look at the before and after, before the statue was struck, Pope Peter was holding the keys of the kingdom. And now, after that lightning strike, he's no longer holding the keys of the kingdom. And it happened in Argentina, Pope Francis from Buenos Aires. And also, it happened like right around the time of Pope Francis's birthday. So, certainly, some would argue, this must mean that God is against the pontificate of Pope Francis. Maybe he's even against fiducia supplicans. Maybe he's trying to say that Pope Francis isn't the Pope. I mean, after all, we did have lightning strike the Vatican and St. Peter's twice on the day that Pope Benedict allegedly resigned, right? This is what people will argue. And they've tried to appeal to those things to say, see, Benedict was still really Pope, even though, again, a lot of people can interpret it in many other ways. Others could just interpret it as Benedict's not Pope. God just wasn't in favor of him resigning. Or Catholicism is wrong. And Protestants will say, see, God has struck the Vatican, showing this whole papacy thing is a fraud. It's just, again, there's a million ways to interpret it. But let's briefly look at this here. Let me share my screen. I'm going to share something from Ron Conti and his blog where he talks about this in more detail. Okay, well, let me maybe zoom in on that just a little bit more. See if we can get the text a little bit larger. There we go. All right. Well, again, reports of lightning striking a statue of St. Peter in Argentina. And scrolling down just a little bit here, you can kind of see a before and after. And so before we have a halo of St. Peter, and then we have these keys, what look like metal keys. And I don't know, metal and lightning don't always go together, but okay. And then after that, we, again, assuming the photo is authentic, see there's no halo, and now the whole hand has been cut off, by the lightning strike, and the keys are gone. Well, Ron Conti confirmed through the use of this image that was taken prior to the lightning strike that the halo had already been removed from the statue. So that explains that. Now, as far as the keys, one might still assert, well, those are gone. And I would just simply say, yeah, not uncommon for lightning to strike things that appear to be made by metal. But hey, if there's something else going on here, let me know. But again, I wouldn't read too much into it because, again, a Muslim can just look at this and say, see, that's just proof that Catholicism, Christianity is false. And a Protestant can look at it and say, see, Peter wasn't actually the Pope. There you go. Peter wasn't the Pope. Catholicism is false. There it is. Others are going to look at it and they'll read what they want to read into it. I guess Pope Francis is no longer the Pope. Or, I guess he was never Pope. Again, we can read this in any way that we want. And is that really wise? Is this something God has given us as a rule of faith? Or has he given us something else as a rule of faith? Perhaps the Catholic magisterium. And the consensus of Catholic theologians that assert very clearly that the universal and peaceful acceptance of a pope and a pontificate surely indicates that individual is pope, which is certainly the case in the case of Pope Francis. And so he was definitely pope, according to the rule of faith that we have. And then, moreover, I'll add, there's no reason to believe that he has somehow lost the papacy. Some have an opinion that popes automatically lose the papacy if they become a heretic. That is a position that I've argued against on this program. And I would note, not only is that just merely an opinion, It's also a recipe for disaster. Um, Aside from the fact that it conflicts with the Eighth Ecumenical Council, I would just point out that if you adopted that view, then you're making yourself the ultimate um, person who determines whether or not the Pope is still the Pope, because now you're the one determining whether or not he has been guilty of heresy and automatically lost the papacy, which is again a recipe for disaster whenever you make yourself your own Pope and you do something like this. Um, so I didn't find this very convincing, and I do think that Ron Conti brought up a very interesting uh, point from sacred scripture that I'll read from Numbers 16:28 through 29. And Moses said, "By this shall you know that the Lord had sent me to do all that you discern, and that I have not brought these things out of my own heart." So, how are we going to know that what Moses is saying is true? If these men pass away by the common death of men, or if they will be visited by a scourge of a kind of which others are often visited, then the Lord did not send me. But if the Lord accomplishes something new, so that the earth opens its mouth and swallows them whole, along with everything that belongs to them, and they descend alive into the underworld, then you shall know that they have blasphemed the Lord. And so the point here is that Moses wants to say, look, the way you really validate this message is not by appealing to everyday things, weather phenomena, or some kind of typical scourge or a common way of dying. That doesn't really validate anything because there's nothing exceptional there. And yeah, lightning striking a statue that appears to be holding metal doesn't really seem that exceptional. um but if there really is something that God is trying to get your attention for, he's going to give you a more grandiose sign, something that is not uh, something that can be merely confused with common weather phenomenon. Um, so again, I don't find it very productive to make these appeals because it is a wax nose, and I would suspect anybody who promotes this as validation for a theological position. And yeah, I wouldn't have my faith disturbed or shaken by these things. And I would caution people from in the future trying to seek these um, signs from God to determine what his will is over and against the actual rule of faith that he has given us. It's kind of as if we're chasing around for answers from everywhere except the one place that God has given us answers, and that's the magisterium. You know why we're looking everywhere except the magisterium? Because we have a problem with the magisterium, because we're fighting against the magisterium in some cases, because we no longer trust the magisterium. And I would say, bingo, that's it. That's the deeper problem. And I think that problem needs to be addressed. Now, I'll briefly mention that, yes, I am aware of the article in Crisis Magazine that Regis Martin has written about Pope Francis needing to step down. And I am going to be reviewing this in detail, most likely later today. So stay tuned for that. I'll also make people aware of an article I just wrote for my own website, Reason and Theology. Um, you can go to reasonandtheology.com and see it. It's a response to Dr. John Joy. Is there a charism of infallible safety? I encourage everybody to go and read it. I think that you'll see a very helpful defense of the Catholic doctrine of a charism of safety that demonstrates the Catholic Church cannot teach heresy, even if it teaches non definitively. A lot of people asked me to engage his article. So I did, and I hope y'all find it helpful. And I'll probably do, most likely tomorrow, I would imagine, a video where I go through the article and um, make the points in a video format for those who prefer video content instead of articles. But for those who appreciate written articles, that's already available to you, and I just wanted to call your attention to it. All right. Well, hopefully this was helpful. If it was, hit that like button and the subscribe button. Also, check me out, patreon.com/reason and theology. You'll get access to extra content there, and you'll have an opportunity to support what RNT is doing here financially. And so, if you believe that this is helpful to people and you want to see it continue, please consider supporting RNT there. Again, patreon.com/reason and theology. There's also a GoFundMe link and a PayPal link there in the show notes if you would just rather use those. All right, well, stay tuned for more, namely a response to Dr. Regis Martin on his claims here about Pope Francis and Fiducia Supplicans. All right, that's going to do it. We'll see y'all later. God bless. Are you a Catholic thinking about converting to Eastern Orthodoxy? Or are you a Protestant discerning whether or not to become Catholic or Eastern Orthodox? If so, I have the book just for you. It's called Answering Orthodoxy. It engages all of the arguments that Eastern Orthodox use against the Catholic Church. I respond to all of them. I show that they are in error, and in fact, they're inconsistent, because the things that Orthodox are objecting to are in fact found in their own tradition. So the fullness of the faith can only be found in the Catholic Church. Check out the book right now at shop.catholic.com for your copy today.